All right, it's time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time in our conflict and compromise unit, we are looking at the Constitutional Convention. So, as an issue of historiography, if you remember, I gave you the opinion last time that we should call the fighting that took place between 1775 and 1783 the American War for Independence. Said that basically it was a war of secession, that they wanted to be left alone, the colonists did, and to be allowed to rule themselves. So, the question is then, was there ever an American Revolution? Well, during the War for Independence, the colonists put out a new document called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Usually we just call them the Articles of Confederation. And basically they created a super alliance between the separate states of the United States, but it did not create a United States of America government. It created kind of like almost like a United Nations kind of a thing where everybody got together and agreed to work together. But then we had Shays' Rebellion, which was basically led by Daniel Shays and concerned a lot of people because it was basically farmers making the argument that they shouldn't be taxed because their representatives weren't, involved in the process, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of the states started to feel a little bit concerned about the Articles of Confederation and whether they were strong enough to meet the needs of modern America. And this led to, in 1787, the Constitutional Convention. Originally, the Constitutional Convention's goal was to just revise the Articles of Confederation, to kind of beef them up a little bit. However, they basically decided that that couldn't happen and that they needed to be thrown in the trash can, and America needed to start over. And so the framers of the Constitution basically decided that they were going to do something again. And this is where we get to the question of whether there was an American Revolution or not. This is definitely not a part of the War for Independence. That's over. The question is what changed and how. So when we look at the compromises that went into the new Constitution at the Constitutional Convention, the first one is between big states like Virginia, who basically felt like there should be one legislative branch in the government and it should be based on population, and then small states like New Jersey, who felt like every state should get the same number of votes. We call these the large state and the small state plan. And basically, neither one of them would agree. This is when Benjamin Franklin presumably came up with the idea, as he was sitting and listening to the debates, of having two houses. That way each state could or each type of state could get what it wanted. And so basically Virginia agreed to that plan as long as only money bills had to start in the House of Representatives, basically acknowledging the fact that they're paying more taxes, and therefore taxes should be written by the group that's based on population, not based on just being kind of a member of the alliance. And so we have that first compromise, the large state and the small state plans. The next compromise is a little bit harder to pin down. It's between the Democrats and the Republicans. Important to note that while these kind of perspectives bear some resemblance to our modern political parties, they were not exactly the same thing. So Mr. Gilson is not talking about, the Bearded Wonder, is not talking about Joseph Biden and the Democrats or Donald Trump and the Republicans here. The principles might sound familiar to those parties, but the ideas of a Democrat, small d, and a Republican, small r, are more in how you run a government, not a specific political party. In general, the small d Democrats, the people that supported a democratic government, thought that everybody should get the right to vote. The Republicans, small r Republican, were concerned about that plan. For a couple of reasons. One was that a lot of Americans didn't have much of an education, and so how were they to be trusted with a vote? But it was also this issue of taxes. They were concerned that if we give everybody a right to vote, that all the poor people who outnumbered a lot of the more wealthy Americans would all vote to take the tax money and give themselves things with it. In other words, if you think about like a classroom analogy, you have one kid that gets an A plus and everybody else gets Fs. Well, in a democracy, all the kids with Fs vote to give themselves extra credit by taking it from the A plus student. The problem is that's not really fair to the person that worked hard to have it. And so the argument of the Republicans is that they needed a system that kind of did both. And that's what we have. So when you look at our governmental structure, you can see here the little vote symbol down there by the House of Representatives in the bottom left. The House of Representatives is a Democratic House. In other words, one person, one vote, or at least kind of close to it. The Senate, on the other hand, was picked by the state legislatures, and those were picked by the people. And so the Senate represented a totally different group of people. The idea was they would have to work together in order to make a law. It kind of gave each group a way to cancel the other's actions. You also had electors, and people voted for the electors, and then they vote for president. And then you have the Constitution, what literally they were writing at the time. And you had a Supreme Court that basically made sure that the plan was followed until somebody voted for laws to change the plan, and would rule whether the laws were allowed by the plan or not. And so it was really a compromise between the Democratic and the Republican positions, a major one, where the American government was really kind of both. But then you also had a third group of people. And we would call them today libertarians. They would call themselves back then classic liberals. It's the same idea, again, different than the Libertarian Party a little bit today. But basically, the libertarians argued that both the Republican and the Democrat system had the potential to mess with people and their rights. And they didn't want either one of those. So they didn't want kind of the elite telling them how to live their lives or what was good for them. But they also didn't want, if they were in the minority, for the majority to tell them what to do. And so the libertarians really pushed for the Bill of Rights to be passed. And in fact, several states like North Carolina refused to sign the Constitution and to ratify it until a Bill of Rights was drafted. And so you really have a compromise of all three of these political traditions. They happen to all have political parties in America today. Again, really important that you understand that while the parties today bear some resemblance to these views, we're talking about 250 years ago, and a lot has changed in that time. Finally, when we look at compromise, we have the issue of slavery. The northern states and the southern states had to deal with what do we do about slavery in our new Constitution. And the northern states by this point had decided that they were pretty much done with slavery, that they were ready to move on and just kind of do things without slavery. They were also concerned that they didn't want to be forced to accept slavery within their state borders. They wanted to be able to make those decisions themselves about whether to allow slavery or not. And so they really wanted to leave it up to the states. The southern states were okay with that as long as the North didn't turn into kind of like a safe haven for slaves. They were concerned that slaves might run up to the north to get free, and that if the northern states weren't like forced to return those slaves, that it would undermine the institution of slavery. And so, literally, the fourth article of the Constitution, the only thing the Constitution says about slavery at all, is that if a slave runs away to a state that does not have slavery, they're still a slave and have to be returned. That's it. That's the only thing you'll read about slavery anywhere in the Constitution. They pretty much left it up to each state. So, was there an American Revolution after the War for Independence? My opinion, yes. The Constitution of the United States joined the states in a brand new way that really changed their relationship to each other in ways that you can't really fully explain. Certainly, they viewed themselves as a super alliance under the Articles of Confederation. Now, how long the American Revolution took is a really interesting question to ask yourself. For example, the Confederate states tried to make the argument during the Civil War that they were still in a super alliance and could leave whenever they wanted. The North kind of challenged them on that. We fought a war over it, and eventually they became a part of the United States again. The Pledge of Allegiance says one nation under God, indivisible, meaning it cannot be divided. And so while we are 50 states within one country, you cannot break that one country into separate parts. Well, that was not what existed before the Constitution, and that was definitely not what existed under the Articles of Confederation. And so you might want to, as a historian, and this is a more complicated issue than I want to tackle in this video, but how long the American Revolution took from the writing of the Constitution until somewhere. You could end it at 1791 with the adoption of the Bill of Rights. You could go way further than that and say that the American Revolution didn't end until the end of the war between the states. You could literally kind of argue that it started in 1787 and ended in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, when finally the whole concept of one nation was settled. Whether it was settled legally or not, it was settled on a battlefield. And so it's an open question. Was there an American Revolution? Like I said, this is, you see me pointing to the sky there, standing on my little box. That's my opinion of how I would title the book. But you're certainly welcome to disagree with it. We're all historians here. So thanks for watching. That's it for this unit. I hope you have a good day.